magic.
You're listening to Pick a Disc, a podcast where guests we pick any music and then are asked the multiple reasonings by the host Matt, revealing stories and memories via a long chat. From the millions and millions of the albums ever made, Andy Williams entered from the podcast frame to frame and again has claimed a piece of music he'll proclaim, exclaim all the feelings he has on the app today. Green Day's a long way from the chat room now all in. You won't find recordings of Hamilton boring or the exploring that Andy and Matt undertake. For goodness sake, Matt, stop rapping the intro to this episode. Okay, I will. You're listening to Pick a Disc. This is the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. I'm your host, Matt Latham, and as you probably may have gathered from the well-constructed but running out of steam introduction you may have heard, we're talking about the original Broadway cast recording of Hamilton with Andy Williams from the Frame to Frame podcast. You may also have just picked up that my voice is still a bit iffy from Christmas. My voice I had laryngitis pretty much over Christmas, and I can still kind of feel the lingering aspects of this cold that I've had. So apologise for that. But this was recorded before then, so my voice is slightly less sexy than it is now. But before I hit play on the conversation, I just want to say thank you for listening. Welcome to 2023. Bunch of good stuff coming this year, I hope. And yeah, if you like what you're hearing, follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook under Pick a Disc. There's a Discord server. You can find that in the show notes. And yeah, that is pretty much it. So now, before I decide to rhyme the rest of this introduction, I guess I better just press play on the interview with Andy. So yeah, let's speak to Andy. And back for a second time, it's Mr. Andy Williams from the Frame to Frame podcast. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me back and indulging me on this one.
Yes, I've been constantly getting exciting messages saying, "Oh yeah, I've done 15 pages of notes on one song." No.
When something's as dense as this, then it's easy to do.
Yes, and we are. This is like we are opening. Well, kind of opening. We've already had one episode so far, but yeah, we're still in the kind of the introductory of 2023. So, how's 2023 been for you so far, Andy?
I'm hoping great.
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself from the past, but yeah, I'm sure it's been great, and I'm sure Christmas was absolutely lovely as well.
I know, yeah. I am slightly concerned because you are wearing a Christmas jumper. I'm very concerned that you've not taken it off since Christmas, but
I mean, I love it so much, I don't want to take it off.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be staging an intervention at some point saying, "Andy, please, it's January, take off the jumper."
It's as much a grommet jumper as it is a Christmas jumper. So
yes. We are kind of recording this in the middle of December. And Andy even said that he'd even arranged the background for me to pick apart, and so I'm deliberately not doing that. But talking about the background, you did point out before we start recording of a certain book that's related to what we're talking about. So without stringing along the audience for any longer, why don't you tell the listeners the disc that you've picked for us to talk about today?
So the disc I've picked for us will be Hamilton, an American musical, written by Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yep, the Hamilton soundtrack for the Broadway show. Why have you picked this disc, Andy?
I think it has been on my sort of most listened to albums every year since it's come out. And I can give you every single word in the right order, and I can go through it. It's the only show that I've heard the audio on the soundtrack to prior to actually going to watching the show. I'd listened to it before it was even available in the UK, before it even opened in the West End. So I heard it and just fell in love, and it was a gateway into a previous sort of dormant passion of mine in American history. So it's just one of those things that the more I look into it, the more I love it.
Would you like to tell us about how you discovered the existence of the musical, if you fancy, Andy?
So it was the Tonys. It was when it won all the Tony Awards, and then it basically, I found out that it was a sung-through musical, that you could listen to the album separately to the show, because obviously there was no way of seeing this massive hit show. It was garnering all of this praise. I listened to a lot of American podcasts and a lot of American pop culture stuff, and it was really gaining some traction. And when it did break through and win all the Tonys that it did, it was a case of then, oh, okay, I can listen to this, I can understand it if I apply myself. And the more you apply yourself, I think the more you get out of it.
So the question I used to ask at the very, very end is, have you ever seen the band live? It's not going to apply to this kind of, we'll get into slightly specifics about why in a second, but so you've now seen Hamilton live?
3 times.
3
yes.
times. So when was the first time?
So it opened in the West End in 2017. I had tickets to see it in the tail end of 2016, but it delayed. Basically, they were remodeling the theatre, so they delayed it by about 3 months. We ended up getting slightly better seats as a result. So
that was quite handy, Andy.
It was great, but not ideal. We were looking forward to it. So, but yeah, I saw it in like the January of 2017, so literally not long after it opened over here.
I'll just ruin my flow. I don't know if you noticed, twice I'd tried to find names that rhyme with your name. So fancy and handy.
I did.
Yes.
I did,
yeah, and I'm and annoyingly, I've just managed to lose my flow. Yeah. So yeah, it's me looking like a twat, Matt.
Not quite the fat cat you were looking for.
Yeah, no. Bit of a prat, Matt, but completely random. My favourite Pokemon is Sandshrew, Andrew.
Okay. Should we get back to the chat now, Matt?
Yes, let's do that, Matt. Yeah, I was going to warn everyone now. I did say that the reason Andy did message me saying that, I can start now, and saying I need to set things up, and the real reason was I was writing down a load of words that rhyme with your name. So I look forward to shoehorning that joke and milking it for as much.
I'm sure it'll get funnier.
Oh yes, I'm sure it can be. Jokes. I'm sure it can be, Andy. So
repetition's a form of comedy.
Indeed, it can be, Andy.
Repetition is a form of comedy.
It can be, Andy. But as we was not talking about, one of the kind of interesting things, this is like another first for the podcast. This is the first kind of like show soundtrack that we've kind of done, or the first musical. The closest we've probably got to a quote unquote musical is probably the South Park film. South Park film, but again, that's just a story with songs in it. This is, I'm not sure what the technical term is. Is it sung through?
Yeah.
Sung through. So it's a sung through kind of musical. So pretty much when you said, you can do Hamilton, I messaged you saying, do I watch the Disney Plus thing? Or will I get a thing? But you're saying, no, it is pretty much.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into it when we get there, but there's sort of odd little bits that are different in that, like, on the album, for example, you don't hear John Lawrence dying. You don't hear about Hamilton finding that out. That's kind of the big omission, but it's sort of things like when a track ends, the music will play in the show, so it allows the actors the time to sort of change around and do what they need to on the set, which doesn't happen on the album.
Okay, so so there's that, and so my approach to this has been to I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do like it's like a normal episode. This is a normal episode, like any other kind of traditional episode of the podcasting. Now I'm going to sit down and just listen to it, listen to it in different ways. To the point, what I think, because it's about nearly 2 hours 20 minutes. I ended up I've only ever listened to it all the way through once, and that was over the course of 4 days. On the drive to work.
Wow.
So so it was kind of like like a kind of musical audio book in a way. But but that was the first time I'd listened to it. My kind of history with Hamilton is that I just know it as something that now everyone on Twitter would not shut up about, to the point I actually blocked the word Hamilton for a while because
wow.
I'm pretty sure as well because it started flaring up again. I think when Disney Plus started, because of the kind of like filmed version of the thing came up, and I was like, it was just one of the things that people would not shut up about. And
I was probably one of those people.
I couldn't tell. I probably wouldn't be able to to tell things on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was one. I think it's one of those things. Like, but I think at the time it was like, it'd be one of those things I perhaps might try one day, but I'm not in a rush to listen to.
And now I've made you.
Yes, and someone's made me listen to it. I think the exact thing when you mentioned to it, me saying, "Oh, I'd like to talk about this." I'm like, I'm gonna have to listen to it now, aren't I? But it's not. I think it's more like it's not me kind of actively not trying to avoid it because it was going to annoy me or anything. I think it's just a case that I think it was like almost, where things seemed slightly overhyped. Yeah, and
that was kind of my worry coming into it, was that obviously I'd heard a load of it I'd heard about it an awful lot on different podcasts through different media, and it literally just won like a load of Tonys, which is basically the stage version of an Oscar or stage version of a Grammy. And it was nominated for a record amount and it won a huge amount as well. So it was a case of, there's clearly this hype around it. It was hype within the kind of theatre world at that point. It wasn't quite as out there as it became. But then, when I listened to it, I fell in love and completely understood the reason why.
Oh, okay. I think as well, I think some of the stuff I think as well, I think perhaps is because I think since this, I think what's his name?
Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think since that, like, he appears like in guest appearances in a load of things. He's been on stuff, and I've just, it's just been like there. I've not been kind of blown away by the things I've seen him in terms of like guest appearances and stuff. So I think he appears in like Brooklyn Nine-Nine at one point.
He does. That's mostly because he's a fan of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He did a voice on Bluey.
Okay, I've not watched
Bluey's genuinely great. Bluey I would watch without my children. It's genuinely brilliant.
Colin from Widdig Music and Through With This Was Issue, I think was more excited about the new series of Bluey being on Disney Plus than I think his daughter.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I could match the level of excitement of my children, but I was certainly equal to them at very least.
And I mean, I'm assuming that's something that perhaps like I think you probably understand it more as a parent. I think perhaps so.
I mean, I only come at it from one perspective, but I actually think it works for everyone. I think it's just really good storytelling. Bluey just so happened to be, it started life as a sitcom that was going to be aimed at adults. But then someone said, there's a kids show in this. Like, if you make the kids the main characters instead of the parents, then there's a kids show. It's kind of like the most non-problematic Peppa Pig you've ever seen. Like, take all of the horrible elements out of Peppa Pig, and you've got Bluey.
Okay. So I'm not familiar with Peppa Pig at all, so I'm not. And I think the biggest thing that I think I've seen him in was when he played Lee Scoresby in his Dark Materials. And I don't know. I mean, I've not seen the Golden Compass or the film version, but I know Sam Elliott played him. But my vision of that character was always like an older, like Sam Elliott, more or less, like a kind of older kind of cowboy kind of.
One of my friends actually interviewed Lin-Manuel Miranda on the back of his appearances in his Dark Materials, and he literally put that question to him. He said that I think the word he used was gravitas. He was expecting a bit more gravitas to that role because he worried that he would be quite lightweight towards it. And he said what he's tried to do is take something from every acting role that he did. So up to that point, he'd only really done Mary Poppins. Okay. So that was a case of that taught him how to dance. In a way, like in Hamilton, if you've seen the show, there's not really a whole lot of dancing in it. It's not really that theatrical in that sense. But there was that in Mary Poppins. And then with Lee Scoresby, he said what he took was the acting chops and the relationship that he was to have with Lyra. So, it's commendable that he's looking to take things from things, whether you like him as that character or not. I didn't grow up with Northern Lights the books. Or Northern Lights or his Dark Materials from the books. I came to them much later. I didn't necessarily have Lin-Manuel Miranda in mind when I was reading them, but, I'm not adverse to that characterization. It's also worth mentioning he's written songs for Disney.
Yes.
Since Hamilton as well. So, he did the score for Encanto and the songs for Encanto. He did Moana. They're two of the sort of major ones he's been working on.
Very, very, very funny slight story. There's a weird thing that's happening with my Spotify app at the moment where I think if I listen to a playlist, I think and it's usually in the one kind of area where that I'm driving through. I think there's like a dead zone in terms of something, because what happens is that either the playlist will reset back to the start of it after about 2 or 3 tracks, or, for example, I was again this morning listening to it, and then a song started playing, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, this song sounds very almost Caribbean-esque. There's like ukuleles and stuff, and well, I'm not sure who this actor is, but he sounds a lot like Dwayne Johnson. Well, I didn't realise there was a character called Moana in Hamilton. And right, it took me about 2 minutes to realise that Spotify had somehow just this is about 3/4 through. I was 3/4 away through the album at this point. And somehow Spotify had just decided to stop playing that playlist and start playing a song from Moana. And I was like, that really does sound like. When was The Rock in in Hamilton? Yeah,
that Tony Award-winning actor Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't realise he was in Hamilton. I got a feeling then. I was there going like, why the flipping heck was he playing Moana? But then I've got a feeling it might have been a song that he'd saying that he might have been like, oh yeah, The Connection. He was written by Manuel, so he might have been. So we just play another song that was written by him and stuff. I remember, funny enough, I was not a fan of Encanto actually. I just not.
I didn't have a choice. My kids liked it, so I kind of had to watch it an awful lot. And similar to pretty much my experience with all of Lin-Manuel Miranda's music, the more you listen to it, the more you can take from.
Okay. I'm gonna put a pin in that thought for a bit. But before we carry on talking about the Hamilton soundtrack, I want to go all the way back to not talk about Hamilton, but talk about musicals. Now, you said this was the first musical that you listened to before you actually go and see musicals. So I'm gathering that you're a fan of musicals, or do you like?
So I wasn't. And then I started dating my now wife, and she sort of said, "Hey, why don't we go and watch Wicked?" This was literally about a month or so after we'd started dating. So I was sort of like, okay, right, I like The Wizard of Oz. Like, I like film musicals. I like the old sort of classic, the Fred and Ginger stuff, and yeah. And so I was sort of like, right, okay, sure, I like The Wizard of Oz. Let's go and see what it's like. And that experience basically went, oh wow, let's go and watch everything that we can. So before we had kids, it was a case of every so often we'd be like, right, okay, let's go up to London and we'll watch something, maybe a Saturday matinee, and then we'll take in a Saturday evening. Like, we'll try and cram the 2 shows into the one trip. So yeah, we managed to see quite a lot. We go whenever we can now. A few months ago, we went to go and see The Colour Purple when it was on tour. It's more now we go and see things on tour as opposed to going up to London for weekends. But yeah, I absolutely, when I go into a musical, as an example, at time of recording, Matilda's been out a couple of weeks. We took the kids to the cinema to see it on the weekend of release because we've seen the musical, we know the musical, we love the musical, and we knew that our 7-year-old would get an awful lot out of it. The 4-year-old, she was kind of ambivalent. She knew some of the songs, but she didn't connect with it in the same way. But yeah, it's one of those things that we just kind of look at it as, when we're looking for gifts for each other, what should we do? What does she want to see?
So you pretty much became kind of like a fan of musicals and stuff then.
Yeah.
So which one? So I think, okay, aside from Hamilton, then which one would you say like are some of your all-time favourites?
Oh, I love Matilda. I know I just mentioned it, but I love Tim Minchin's writing. I think I connect an awful lot with great lyrics, and I always have. When you go back through what I love in terms of my actual music taste, I always connect with lyrics first. Mm-hmm. And I love Book of Mormon. We referenced South Park the musical earlier. They're the 2 that kind of jump straight to my head now. Phantom of the Opera is obviously a classic. Les Mis was okay, but we didn't really have the best seats, so it might be a case if we need to revisit it. Yeah, I'll go with those ones for the time being. Okay.
So yeah, I think in terms of musicals, I've not been to many.
Too busy going to gigs, that's the problem. Man.
Yeah. I'm saying proper music, but no. That's like all the music. Musicals are proper music. No,
there's a style to it. Isn't
oh yeah. There's definitely a kind of style stuff, and I've not been to many, but the ones I have been to, I've like there's a kind of like there's an impact and a power. Like there's like a power. There's this weird thing like if you've got someone who's like got a really strong voice, it feels like they can punch you in the chest. Like you can feel the impact stuff that you don't get and stuff. So.
That's what happened with Wicked for me. Like the song Defying Gravity, I don't know who it was that sang it, but the moment that she sort of defies gravity, that's the big song in the show, that was one of the moments that I went, oh wow, okay, and that sort of really took me back. I think we discussed musicals briefly as well when I was on for American Idiot.
Yes, because I went to see American Idiot in Birmingham, mainly because a friend works at the theatre and was able to get free tickets. But I remember being a bit. I can't remember if did I say I was a bit ambivalent towards it. Like
basically, yeah.
Yeah, but
I think that was because you came to it not knowing the album. And
yes,
the story of that show isn't necessarily as because it was an actual rock album as opposed to being written for the stage.
Yeah.
It's a bit more muddy in terms of an actual musical.
I think from top of my memory, I think I've been to 3 musicals in London. I dragged my friends down. This was in 2007. I pretty much kind of dragged my friends to go and see Avenue Q, and I was like, what, 2021? Yeah, 2021. And like they humoured me. They just humoured me to go and see it. And I'm like, oh, you'll like it. And I remember my friend, it was Mark at the time, we got to the intermission, turned to me and went, this is fucking hilarious. Like he didn't know what to expect. He was just humouring, going, oh yeah, Matt's been like wants to go here, so let's just waste some money coming down to London and stuff. But yeah, I remember seeing Avenue Q, and I was like 1021.
One I've not seen.
You've not seen Avenue Q?
No.
No. Yeah. Again,
I've heard it's great, and
it's the kind of Matt Stone and Trey Parker kind of influence. It's the influence of them because they're not involved, but you can kind of see the Trey Parker influence. But then the creators of Avenue Q would then go to work with Trey Parker and Matt Stone to create the Book of Mormon, which is also one I have seen. I saw that's the last one I remember seeing. And this was like years ago. I just remember just walking around thinking, just wondering what to go and look at. And I remember waiting. I can't remember what the term. Like you just wait and see if there's any tickets left.
Yeah.
Like about an hour before.
Yeah.
Just wait outside. And
yeah.
So I was just waiting. Outside for about 4 or 5 minutes and say, oh yeah, there is some. And I went to go and see the Book of Mormon. And yeah, considering how much anyone who's listened to the Say Pop movie would like, I love Trey Parker. So yeah, that's just. Yeah, so I love that. And the other one that I saw before then was when my sister lived in London. I think me, her, and my mum went to go and see Wicked. But we was right at the top, at the back, to the point. So it was right at the top. So the impact of Defying Gravity was more like, oh yeah, we still see the top of red. But that was one I remember kind of feeling the the power of the kind of the voice, like this. So like whoever plays. Is it Alphabet? Yeah, right. Yeah, like you have to be able to hit those notes and stuff. And at a certain point, it reverberates through everyone and it kind of hits you. And that's the kind of thing that I think you get from the live kind of show from it. And perhaps something that I think perhaps has an impact. And this leading towards my kind of views of the Hamilton soundtrack. So,
I am very curious because I'm curious to see how it plays sort of first time.
Yeah,
because I don't remember. Do you know what I mean? It's been so long. I've listened to it probably thousands of times at this point. I don't remember the first reaction.
Yeah, but you've got the at least 3 times you've got the memory of experiencing it live to fall to.
Yeah. Plus, then seeing it however many times on Disney Plus, it's now a thing that we'll just put on in the background just because it's kind of background noise.
Yeah, in terms of an audio thing, I'm not sure. I can see what it's trying. I quite like what it's trying to do, but I think it was only when I started reading a bit more of the story, like the background, and I ended up reading a bit more about the story of the actual kind of Alexander Hamilton this morning, where I perhaps started to understand a bit more. I kind of, considering I'm a lyrics person, I sometimes struggle to comprehend what the plot is happening during musicals.
This is why I don't tend to listen to things beforehand.
Yeah.
Because it is a case of kind of you take from it what you bring. And I was quite open to, I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this probably about 10 listens and see how it goes and how I fall into the story. And then basically when it clicked, it just clicked, and every subsequent listen, literally every listen, I think I found something new, something else to fall in love with.
Okay. I think, I remember one of the things I think I was probably, when I was listening to it, I'm like, I can't think of any other soundtrack any movie soundtrack that we've covered, with the exception of South Park, because I was familiar with it already. And I think Josie and the Pussycats, because I should have watched Josie and the Pussycats 20 years ago, and it was the excuse for me to finally watch it. I've tried to actively not watch the film, particularly if I've not seen it before. And I'm like, I'm going to, because I was, as I said, I remember messaging you saying, should I watch that? And you said it's slightly different. I was like, no, I'll get the raw experience from the audio first. And I think if I planned it better, if I planned things better and not been so busy, like with not recording other episodes and another podcast.
How dare you record other podcasts?
I know. Okay, so I probably should have perhaps done a bit more forward planning and listened to the album earlier and tried to fit in the actual stage show as well. But I think at some point I think over Christmas, I think what I'll probably do is I'm going to sit down and watch the thing on Disney Plus, just to get.
It's a great experience.
Yeah.
For me, it doesn't compare.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get into this, but the guys you see and the guys and girls that you see on the Disney Plus are the people that are singing on the album. It's the original cast.
Yeah.
Even those that have left the cast at that point, like Jonathan Groff plays King George III, which he did in the original cast recording and he did in the original cast. But he'd left the production by that point to go on and do sort of other things. Mindhunter, I guess. But he returned specifically for recording it for basically prosperity services. Like the idea that they've managed to get all of the original cast back, and that original cast is kind of so widely heralded as I mean, you look, you've got Anthony Ramos in there, you've got David Diggs in there, you've got Christopher Jackson, like people that have then sort of gone on to do other interesting things. So they wanted to kind of record that and keep it, and they did that sort of towards the end of the original run when they were coming to the end of their contract, and they kept it back. And the original plan was to release it in the cinemas, but then COVID happened, so they put it up on Disney Plus.
I think that probably might have helped actually, because I got things. I think if I remember rightly, that was around the start of the pandemic. I think was it around the start of 2020? Well, around the start of the pandemic, and I think that might have helped it, because I think that was a selling point. I think that's what they went hard, on the promotion for that to come through. So, but I think there's some interesting stuff in there. I think the length. I think the fact it's 2 hours and 20, is quite a daunting task to listen to. Yeah,
that's pretty standard for a Broadway show.
Yeah,
like to have a 2 hour 20 show and have a break in the middle. Like that's kind of okay when you're in a theatre. I understand it's quite intimidating to sit and listen to a whole album in one sitting, 2 hours 20. Like that's quite the commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a film, like that. Very often on frame to frame, I kind of shy away from films that are over 2 hours, because you sort of go, have I really got that kind of time? Is it worth it? Like I hadn't watched The Godfather 2 until it came up on one episode this year that I had to then watch it.
So that's
because of that exact reason.
So you've got your own kind of Latham limit when it comes to films.
To an extent.
Yeah, because I don't like long films. Too fair, I can't remember. Is that funny enough? I'm like, I'm not a fan of long films either. But I'll sit down and watch 4 episodes of a TV show.
I still can't do that. I can't do that.
Yeah, I will do that. I just don't know what it. But then again, that's a whole other story about like characters and continuing dramas and stuff and all that.
It's also broken up in a different way. Like you have a climax every hour, effectively, whereas you don't get that in movies. It's written differently.
Yeah, or like you get to a point and you look at your watch and he's going, it's 10:30. I can fit another episode of 911 Lone Star.
If that's what you're into.
I'm currently quite addicted to night. I watched 991 Line Star. I'm now currently trying to catch up on 911. I watched the spin-off before the original. So
this is, you just as well be talking Spanish.
the one with Rob Lowe is better than the one with Angela Bassett, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rob Lowe's great.
Yeah. I think 911 suffers from not having Rob Lowe in it. But yeah, before we turn into this turns into pick a TV show. But yeah, so I think so I can kind of see what it's trying to do, and I think some songs, particularly during like the 4 days I listened through it, I think some bits stick in the mind more than others. I found what I did find more interesting was actually like this morning, after finishing it, kind of reading into the actual story and like getting a better understanding of what the thing was happening about, and I think, which I think means that if I'm probably going to read into the actual story of the story, the Wikipedia article on the Burr and Hamilton duel. Spoilers.
Yeah. Well, that's up front, and I love the fact that's up front. If we're going to sort of dive into the musical now, I guess.
Yeah.
Right in the first song, that one of the first things you hear Burr say is, "I'm the damn fool that shot him." They tell you straight up that he's the one that kills him.
Yeah.
And he is our main narrator through the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't really hear Hamilton. So Lin-Manuel as Hamilton, we don't hear him until he's basically saying his name, because everyone's sort of explaining who they are. It's me, I fought with him. Me, I died for him. Me, I trusted him. Me, I'm the damn fool that shot him. So, the fact that they kind of set up all of the characters before we're then introduced to our hero. And I think the story is a bit more well-known. It at least was a bit more well-known in America than it is here. Because he was a sitting vice president. That's something that's not really touched on in the show.
Mm-hmm.
He was a sitting vice president that then killed a former secretary of the Treasury, or the first secretary of the Treasury, in a duel, which was illegal. Even though they kind of say everything is legal in New Jersey as part of the show.
Yeah, to put it into context, that would probably be something like Jeremy Hunt shooting Liz Truss or something.
We'll have had a different Secretary of the Treasury by the time this comes out.
I'm just dating the podcast. But yeah, that is basically like a member of like our cabinet, like Dominic Raab shooting Rishi Sunak or something. Yeah, that's pretty much what it was like. Would be like in a duel. Because I'm pretty sure they was in the same party, weren't they?
Well,
I think
so. That we can come to that a bit later on.
Okay.
Because basically the gist of it was that Burr was very much, and this is kind of what it comes to in the start of the musical, is Burr kind of wants to sit back and assess a situation, whereas Hamilton will go in like a bull in a china shop. These are the two very opposite sides of a coin. Mm-hmm. And, one of Burr's things that he constantly says is that he wants to wait for it. We don't hear what Burr wants until halfway through the second act, through the room where it happens. And it's at that point it becomes the I Want song. Up until that point, he's kind of holding back. You're not really sure. And Hamilton has already been like a bull in a china shop. He's already Secretary of the Treasury at this point. He's already Washington's right-hand man. And, it takes that amount of time just to try and get Burr's ambitions out of him. And once they come out, that's when he flips parties. So even back then, you kind of had, to begin with, you had basically one party. You had the rebels, right? The people that had fought off the British. And then subsequently, even throughout sort of George Washington's time as president, he oversaw the creation of a two-party system. You had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And Hamilton was a Federalist, as was Washington. And then there was the sort of faction of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Aaron Burr that kind of set up this opposition to the existing hierarchy, the way that it already was with Washington. And yeah, he did switch parties to run and get the seat that Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law held in New York. So there's an awful lot of truth, and there's an awful lot of real history that's in the show. Like what I've referenced is kind of all in the show. Very much later on, because the first act is very much sort of Revolutionary War, kicking the British out, having how how Hamilton can rise through the ranks to become George Washington's right-hand man. And we're kind of introduced to all of these players as we're going along. And then the second act is very much, number one, Hamilton's got a son. Number two, he cheats on his wife. Number three, the political leanings and ambitions of Aaron Burr. Then, like the first ever sex scandal in United States history, which who could imagine a political sex scandal in the United States? It's unimaginable. And then, the subsequent betrayal between Burr and Hamilton, and the duel that ultimately ends it all. So the second half is slightly less focused in that sense. So the second disc on the album, I guess, is slightly less focused because the first has the real sort of through line of we're heading towards independence, whereas the second half is kind of beginning to unpick the history of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, quite... I'm assuming some parts of it are kind of embellished for kind of dramatic purposes, but there's a lot of foundations on actual historical events. Very
few is embellished. The only real things that are is the relationship between Angelica Schuyler, so Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
It's implied sort of throughout the show that her relationship with Alexander is more than sister-in-law, brother-in-law. Like it's implied that they basically engage in some kind of tryst. And
so you could say that. You could say that Alexander Hamilton was kind of Randy Andy.
You could indeed, Matt.
Yeah.
So he that there was that kind of implication in the show, which wasn't really there in real life, except for kind of an instance in a letter. But anyway, there was also in the show that there was literally a line that Angelica says that my father has no son, so I'm the one that has to social climb. And that's not true. She was one of 15 children. So she kind of didn't have to. It just made dramatic sense. But, for the most part, it's basically completely true. It kind of messes up the timeline of things a little bit. But the more you dig into it, the more real it actually is.
And was that, I mean, again, this is something probably you said to me, I think, before, in messages before we started recording, that I think some of it, like, kind of spurred an interest in the, like, kind of like the birth of the US. So did this encourage you to kind of read a bit more into the actual history of the founding fathers and?
Mm-hmm. Well, not just revolutions in general. I've mentioned Les Mis. I went back and learned about the French Revolution as a result of Les Mis. And, I listened to a great podcast called Revolutions, which runs through the real history of the American Revolution, because it's impossible to understand the French Revolution without understanding the American Revolution first, because one leads into the other. Okay. The character of Lafayette would appear in both, for example. So Lafayette, who's played in the first act by David Diggs, he is the French character. And he's the kind of the savior of America at a later stage. There's the line that they say, immigrants, we get the job done, because Alexander Hamilton is from St. Croix. He's an immigrant to America. It's literally one of the first things they say in the show. And Lafayette is also French. So in America, you speak to any American historian, and Lafayette's a war hero. He helped them win the War of Independence. If you speak to a French historian, you're then talking, well, again, it's something that's referenced in Hamilton, but Lafayette kind of let the French down. The French aristocrats didn't fare particularly well in the Revolutionary War in France. So he was relying on a promise that he'd had with America to help bail them out. And that didn't happen. They left France on their own.
Yeah, I think from what I gathered from reading into the lyrics and I think history, is that I think wasn't he trying to say, because us being the UK, we're at war with someone, and we was at war with the French, I think, at the time, and I wasn't like the idea being, so the US might help us with the war against the English, but they didn't. They decided to remain neutral.
So in Cabinet Battle Part 2. It's in the second act, and basically Thomas Jefferson is calling out Hamilton for the hypocrisies, because interestingly, the guy who plays, in every production of the show, the guy who plays Lafayette is also the guy who plays Thomas Jefferson. It's the same role. He only appears in, they appear in one half each. So, he's either a revolutionary hero or he's a French radical who was very lucky not to be beheaded. And yeah, they literally say, "Did you forget Lafayette? Have you an ounce of regret? When in their hour of need you forget," like that sort of thing. They literally call out the hypocrisy of, he helped you when you needed it, and now you don't help them back. But that's skipping ahead to like 3/4 of the way through the show.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and I think it perhaps, I wonder if it helps tell or re-contextualize, or at least give a new generation a history lesson of the founding fathers and stuff. There's a nice quote that I think that I found on Wikipedia where Miranda describes Hamilton as about America then as told by America now, which I think is a really good quote actually. And I can probably see it as a way of like kind of teaching perhaps a younger generation about the history in a way that they probably would engage with. Particularly as we get further and further away from I'm not going to get too much into like how the generations assimilate knowledge of stuff, but and perhaps not caring about history, but this is probably a way for them to learn about the founding of the US.
And you got to remember, everything in the US is relatively young. Like, one of the big talking points towards the end of the show is the election of 1800. Like, we're only talking a couple of hundred years ago, whereas the creation of the United Kingdom is a far more distant past. This is relatively recent in terms of the creation of a major superpower in the world. Yeah. And, I think what really drew Miranda to the story is that Alexander Hamilton is about as hip hop as it gets, right? It sounds ridiculous. And there is a video of Lin-Manuel Miranda, performing at a sort of spoken word event that Barack Obama had put on. This was in about 2010, so it was before the show was even around. At that point, it was called the Hamilton Mixtape, which he was just kind of putting together because he had this rough idea. And it ends up being the song that is Alexander Hamilton, the song that opens the show. And the point of it is that Alexander Hamilton suffered some real hardships early on in his life. And this is kind of told to us by the cast in the opening song in Alexander Hamilton. But it's told to us by Hamilton himself during the song Hurricane. Again, we're talking sort of late Act 2. And the point is that he suffered a real hard upbringing. His father was non-existent. His mother died when he was young. He went to live with his cousin. There was a hurricane in St. Croix which destroyed his town. There were people that were sick and dying, and they passed a plate around and managed to collect enough money to send this young kid away to America, because the reason that they did that was because he wrote a poem. So he was for all intents and purposes, he was in a ghetto. He wrote a poem about his experiences, and that then afforded him a better life. And there is very few things more hip-hop than that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, because I was going to ask about this. So, because I find it quite interesting, and I've not read that much into it about kind of Miranda's kind of not obsession or his kind of fascination with Hamilton as a character, well, as a person, and why he found him quite interesting. And I did perhaps hear about this kind of poem that got him off Sir Quat. That's how you pronounce, isn't it, Sir Quat?
I'll go with you. Yeah, I'm probably using the American pronunciation.
Yeah, but yeah, and I was like, okay, so I think there's either parallels or kind of a relatability to Hamilton, to Alexander Hamilton.
It's also the immigrant experience, isn't it? Like, Lin-Manuel Miranda grew up the child of Puerto Ricans, and he kind of grappled with, and he did it a lot within the Heights, he grappled with being an ethnical minority within the community, but also celebrating the community with which he grew up. And it's mentioned a number of times in Hamilton that he is an immigrant, and they kind of do him down for it, and they kind of say that that's why he shouldn't ever be president, because he's not truly American. When the fact is everyone in America is, unless you're from a Native American heritage, most people are immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the tapestry that I think Lin-Manuel Miranda was trying to sew together with this, because he is an immigrant, or he was an immigrant, and he was able to rise above his station and find his way. It's the American dream.
Yeah.
He wrote his way out from where he was and into prosperity and into, like, he's to this day on the $10 bill. There was talks of taking him off the $10 bill, but since the musical and the renewed interest, that's kind of been nixed, and he's staying on the $10 bill for the foreseeable.
Yeah, I think, or at least again, it kind of helps keep the memory of Alexander Hamilton alive, and
that's one of the key themes of the album as well, is the legacy. One of the things that Hamilton comes to at the end is that a legacy is planting seeds in a garden that you never get to see. And the whole time he's writing like he's running out of time, because he wants to preserve a legacy. He wants to leave something behind. He wants to build something that's going to outlive me. Like, it's something that runs through the show. And it's something that Lin-Manuel Miranda really sort of weaved in through the entirety. And that's what the end of the show is ultimately all about. It's ultimately all about Eliza preserving Alex's memory.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah. So, so if we start talking about some of the songs. So,
in what order would you like them?
Well, how I've usually done it is that I'll just let the guests kind of choose to pick the ones, because we're probably not going to have time to go through every single one of them. I have got work in the morning.
I've got sleep to get to.
Yeah.
Well, so firstly, I want to talk about My Shot, which is probably the third song in the show. It's very formative. It's kind of the first major hurdle.
That, I think, is perhaps one of the few songs I perhaps was aware of before.
Before Graham Norton, for example. Wasn't
that the reason I know it is because there's a mashup of, I think, the instrumentation of My Shot mixed in with Lose Yourself by Eminem.
Okay.
They fit quite well each other, and it's been flipped a few times, because there's kind of motivational kind of aspect of both of them.
There is a mashup with an Eminem song in a later track. I cannot remember from the top of my head which one it is, but I will get that for you. I have it here in my notes, but as you've mentioned, there are 15 pages worth, so I will find that. But
I think with the song My Shot, the kind of I do quite like the kind of motif of the multiple meanings of the word shot, and I'm not not throwing away my shot, and and eventually how the play ends.
Well, it's the entire thing. Like, arguably, Hamilton is always shooting for the skies, right? And that's something he's always aiming to do. And people throughout the entire show are told not to throw away their shot. And it all leads back to the opening song. As an aside, Right Hand Man, which we might come to later, basically it's the first appearance of George Washington. It's very, very reminiscent of Square Dance by Eminem, to the extent that there is a mashup called Right Hand Square Dance, which is amazing. It works so, so well. I was genuinely impressed, but we might get to that song a little bit later. But the reason I wanted to talk about My Shot was the fact that it starts. It's basically a history of hip hop in one song. Mm-hmm. And it starts very much with sort of your Run DMC, your question and answer, your steady beats, your traditional call and response kind of rap, as that's where the characters of Mulligan, Lafayette and Lawrence kind of are. And then Hamilton starts talking and starts delivering sort of slightly more nuanced and more complex rhymes and lyricisms. And they begin to mimic that back. So, Hercules Mulligan sort of says that he's got his own ambitions, and he puts that in the cadence that Hamilton has been using, because he wants to socially advance instead of sewing some pants and throw another shot. And by the way, they're in a bar doing shots. So, and, John Lawrence then turns around and says that he wants to sally in on the 1st Black Battalion and have another shot. And then you have Burr cutting in against all of these guys that are beginning to sort of mimic Hamilton's cadence. And Burr cuts in as a sort of, geniuses, lower your voices. You keep out of trouble and you'll double your choices. And he comes back with the call and response rhyme that we just kind of broken out of. So Hamilton he came in and he spoke in a completely different way. And he sort of woke these guys up and galvanized them. And they became very, very close, particularly in real life, particularly Hamilton and John Lawrence, which, there were rumors of more than just friendship. But the way that the show sums itself up, throughout the first song is so in the first song they say that they're a bunch of revolutionary manumission abolitionists. Give me a position, show me where the ammunition is, which is the entire first act of the show. They are people that want to abolish slavery. So that's something that comes out very, very early on, and it's especially important to John Lawrence. But they're willing to pick up arms. They're willing to fight for their country and willing to fight for what they believe in. And the idea of them being willing to die for their country. But it kind of all cuts back to, there's a moment in the song where it's kind of one of the most sort of crowd-pleasing moments where they go sort of, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it's designed to mimic the sound of dial-up internet. Because that's when we're moving into the 21st century. Thereafter, a lot of the rhyming cadences, a lot of the terms that are used, they're very reminiscent of Eminem, Usher, Busta Rhymes, Notorious B.I.G., Puff Daddy. Like, they're then these titans of early noughties hip-hop. And it's all woven in through the DNA of the way that Lin-Manuel Miranda designed the lyrics. And everything kind of follows suit from that. The musical riffs, the homages within different sort of chord progressions used, it's all there. And
yeah, I'm just seeing on Genius where the Wow Wow Wows bit is highlighted, where Lin-Manuel Miranda actually tweeted in 2006 that the Wows share an interval with the AOL dial-up sound.
Yeah, he said it quite a few times in interviews. Yeah. That's the thing. I can't possibly tell you where I've heard all this stuff because I've been gathering it for the last however long. One of the other things I wanted to talk about with my shot was the fact that it does discuss the black and ethnic minority experience within America. Because the line that Hamilton literally says is that, I know the action in the streets is exciting, but Jesus, between all the bleeding and fighting, I've been reading and writing. And number one, it's not only reminiscent of the rhyming cadence that I was talking about, it's also, it's a hip hop story, right? The action in the street is one thing. The action in the street is, I can go out and cause trouble and do all this, but what is really going to help me, what's really going to pull me out of the situation that I'm in, is reading and writing and understanding that we need to handle the financial situation rather than being a nation of states, be a whole nation as one. And it's something that it's so intelligently written. And I'll come back to that phrase throughout the entire, whatever we talk about, I'll keep coming back to the phrase of it's so intelligently written. Because not only has he told us a history of hip hop, starting with Run DMC and ending with, Usher or B.I.G., Busta Rhymes, the people of the noughties. Jay-Z is also a big influence because Jay-Z was young, black and rich in a way that Hamilton is young, scrappy and hungry. The triple in there has to be a direct influence. But it speaks to not just the immigrant experience then, but also the ethnic minority experience of America now.
Yeah, because I think with my shot, I can kind of see, particularly with the different kind of rhyming kind of rhyme schemes that some of the characters have and how they're kind of influenced by the other stuff. I think what I did notice, and that this has an effect on the ones, is I think as you getting on through kind of the album stuff that each character has, it's their own kind of unique either sense of delivery or sense of language kind of rhyme.
We'll get back to that. Yeah. Yeah, it's 100% true. not only does each character kind of have their own signature song, so their signature way of singing to an extent. I think probably the main exception to that is George Washington, because he kind of begins to fit in with a lot of people around him because he's a career politician. He's the most experienced guy of the lot. He is literally the father of the nation at this point. So he kind of fits in with the various characters, but he still has songs of his own. He doesn't rap. He sings. When he raps, the only time he raps is when he's kind of flustered and he's up against it. But what was written for Christopher Jackson, because Chris Jackson was in The Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda, like Washington was written specifically for him in the same way that Lafayette and Jefferson were written with Daveed Diggs in mind, because Lin-Manuel Miranda knew that he'd be able to wrap his tongue around the ridiculous, like, there's a song that we'll come to which has the most amount of words per minute or words per second of any Broadway show ever. And Miranda knew that Daveed Diggs could do that. But yeah, it's a case of each character does have their individual voices and has their own way of speaking. But Hamilton is kind of the jump start for that. Because before Hamilton came along, they were sat doing Run DMC. They were doing, the call and response. It was the relatively simple beats. And then when he came in, he changed the game. And that's kind of the start of our story.
Yeah, something I picked up on during one of the Genius annotations is the kind of like you want that the kind of internal rhyming that's very much kind of like Rakim influenced things.
In my 15-page worth of notes, I didn't note down Rakim, but you're 100% right.
Yeah, and I think a generation would say, okay, we'll probably put Eminem in kind of that internal rhyme, like that almost supernatural ability to rhyme everything. But Eminem was influenced by Rakim, and I think Rakim was one of, if not perhaps one of the first. But
he was up there. I mean, it goes back to Grandmaster Flash, and even in Jefferson, there's an awful lot of that kind of 70s hip hop, which to the extent that he says, such a blunder sometimes make me wonder why I even bring the thunder. Like, it's a direct quote roughly a direct quote from The Message by Grandmaster Flash, which, like, that's 100%, it's there. And it's there because Miranda is such a student of hip hop. He's a student of music, but specifically of hip hop. And it's all conscious. Like, every single line in the show. I could sit here and unpick each line. I didn't even do that on my notes, but I could sit here and go with you every single line, because there are so many different meanings behind them. And there's the reason that certain things have been picked in those exact places is fascinating. And there's a reason that it took so long to write, is that it took about 5 years in all to write, because the work shows. There's a reason that it is as big as it is, and that reason is because it's so well written. It's basically concrete. You could throw something anywhere at this show, and there will be a reason for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, as I'm quite conscious of the time. We're now about an hour of recording, and we've just talked about one song and its impact on the rest of the show. Where do you want to move on to next?
We can jump forward a little bit if that helps. So we'll sort of cut through Story of Tonight. We'll cut through Schuyler Sisters, which does contain, by the way, one of my favourite lyrics, which is where Angelica Schuyler is referencing Thomas Jefferson and says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'm a compel him to include women in the sequel. And every time I've heard that live, it just has an impact. It's just one of those things, get him. Like, I love it so much. We'll cut through that one. The Farmer Refuted, that's kind of interesting, but it's only interesting in a real life nerdy historical context, because it's kind of the way of dramatizing or putting on stage the fact that they were literally smashing each other in the press and Hamilton was making a name for himself. Yeah. You'll be back is what we come to next.
Yeah, because I want to mention that, but we can probably group this in with two other songs.
With the other George. Yeah. So you've got I Know Him, and so what comes next? So You'll Be Back, What Comes Next, and
so those three, so those three are, because those are the ones those are the ones I remember standing out for for a couple of reasons. One, they're quite short. They're the only ones I know that had like because the name like Jonathan, because on the car it just says Jonathan Groff, Jonathan Groff and stuff. But also because as I was sitting there listening to it, all I was in my head I was going. I was waiting for each of them to go da 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 da. Cheer up, Kevin Keegan.
What you've done is hit the nail perfectly on the head, and it basically comes to something I'd noted down, was that it's the deliberate tonal separation between the Americans and the British.
Yeah,
and this being the only British character in the show, it's the only white character in the show, so it's the old white patriarchy. And by the way, musically, it's very reminiscent of the British invasion.
Yeah.
Get it? British invasion.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, that's the exact reason for it. And it's a very British sense of humor as well. Like, I'll kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Like, that's a very British, I can imagine Monty Python making that joke.
It's a very dour kind of like downbeat British humour. It's the dark humour. Yeah.
But it kind of, They serve as let-me-ups for the audience. Not just the audience, for the actors as well. But, they're so perfectly placed within the show that they kind of deflate a lot of the tension that's around at that point. So, we were kind of really building to Revolutionary War, which is then when we were introduced to King George III, who, by the way, is known as the Mad King. Over here, like that's the reputation.
Oh yes,
he's got.
The Madness of King
Madness
George.
of King George. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh bloody hell, yeah. I forgot about that. 'Cause that's I've not seen. It's probably 20 years since I've seen it. But yeah, because I remember seeing the film with Nigel Hawthorne. Because that's the film he wanted. That's the film he apparently had to suffer Demolition Man to film to to get the film.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
100%. So it's the same guy. It's the same Mad King. So it's fascinating that it comes at this exact point in history. But it was also the first song. So You'll Be Back was the first song that Lin-Manuel wrote for the musical. It was the one that just kind of flew off the easiest.
Yeah.
But it's because it's so, I guess, poppy in a way that none of the rest of the show is. It deliberately stands out. But interestingly, the one I did want to settle on next was Right Hand Man.
But just before we go, before we move on to that, there's a nice little kind of bit of trivia with this, where about how we got the title of the song.
Okay.
Yeah. So Miranda was in a conversation with a guy we might know called Hugh Laurie.
Mm-hmm.
So so he was having a chat with Hugh Laurie, and this is the quote that Miranda said. I told him I wanted to write a breakup letter from King George to the colonies. Without blinking, he improved at me. You'll be back, wagging his finger. I laughed and filed it away. Thanks, Hugh Laurie.
You can see Hugh Laurie doing that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, I've not seen the show, but I've not seen the show, but I know you have. The actor playing King George III, is there any kind of Hugh Laurie-ness about?
To an extent, I mean, you could see him playing him.
Yeah.
It's quite a camp role. In many ways, he's there on stage on his own in this ridiculous king's outfit, and he's a petulant child. That's what he is. He's a petulant child that just wants.
Wasn't the Prince Regent the son of George III? So I'm thinking Blackadder 3. Isn't he the son?
I'll go with you on. I'm not a Blackadder expert.
Yeah, the only reason I think that is because I'm pretty sure the Prince Regent's dad, the prince's dad, turns up at the end and he goes, "I want my son to marry this tree," and I've always thought it was George III. I need to double check this.
I'm not a Blackadder expert, despite the fact we've literally just done a Richard Curtis movie, or two Richard Curtis movies on Frame to Frame, which included Bernard and the Genie, by the way, which was with Rowan Atkinson and not long after Blackadder. But, So Hugh Laurie is playing George IV. Right.
Yeah, who is the son of George III. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So he obviously knew the history as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's all connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah, everything's all connected to George III. So, Yeah, so
King,
yeah, I bet you. I bet you give someone half an hour, they'll find George III in American Idiot. But,
Good luck.
Yes. So yes. So where do you want to move on next?
To literally the next song in the album, Right Hand Man. The reason for that is because it's the first appearance of George Washington. Except, I mean, we'll take out the fact that in Alexander Hamilton. But there's a few very interesting things. Washington, as a singer, as a character, comes across as sort of very early 90s hip-hop, so like Public Enemy, Chucky D, the whole East Coast versus West Coast, like you've got a lot of scratching and sampling effects and stuff. He is he's a godfather, right? He's the father of the nation, he's the founding father, and that's the way that musically Miranda kind of sets him up. Like, you hear the British cannons go boom in a way that is very Flavor Flav, it's very Public Enemy. And it's all deliberate. It's all harking back to the great hip hop artists of the 90s and noughties. And it's because that's where Miranda's sensibilities lie. But not only does it call back to these people, it calls back to Pirates of Penzance by Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes, because he mentions the Modern Major General.
He does. Yes. He says he's
I love that song.
Which we should also reference The Elements by Tom Lehrer, right? That's
the same, yeah,
same tune. But Washington does say that he is the model of a modern major general. Basically, from what I understand, Miranda kind of always thought that he could rhyme it better, but that's up to interpretation, I guess. My first kind of
acknowledgement that song existed, a Modern Major General, was actually from Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if you've watched.
I love Studio 60. Yeah, I really wish they'd got more than just that one series.
So the cold open, the second episode, it says, "Will be the very model of a modern made TV show." Yeah. I mean,
brilliant. But yeah, so Lin-Manuel always thought that mineral and general didn't rhyme particularly well. But the strange part that in that part of the song, there's touches of Jay-Z's onto the next one in the strings. So you've got these seemingly forces that are at odds with each other, with Gilbert and Sullivan and Jay-Z, but they're working together, and that's kind of the entire the basis of the show. On another Lin-Manuel Miranda sort of side note, in The Heights, there is a big deal made about $96,000. Holler to anyone that's listened to In the Heights. But they echo in the start of Right Hand Man that there's 32,000 troops in New York Harbor, 32,000 troops in New York Harbor, 32,000 troops in New York Harbor. 3 times 32. 96. Apparently, it's an accident. Miranda says that it's an accident, but it's a great coincidence. Either way. But the reason I wanted to pick this song is because there is a lesson that's so hard learned by Washington that he's desperately trying to impart on the young Hamilton, which is kind of the basis of the entire show, is that dying is easy, young man, living is harder. And Washington has earned that. He's earned that knowledge in a very, very hard way. When he was younger, there was an awful lot of similarity between what Hamilton is like and what Washington was like. He was very reckless, he being Washington, triggering a French and Indian War in the 1750s. And he learned through his experiences to not be rash and reckless, to consider things. It's easy to lionize or to idolize people that die young. Like you look at, we do it now. You can look at Kurt Cobain, you can look at Amy Winehouse, you can look at Brandon Lee.
The 27 Club, yeah.
Yeah. It's easy to say, I'm going to be glorious and die young. I'm going to burn brightly but not long. Whereas Washington is saying, no, living is the hard thing to do. And that's what he begins to try and convince Hamilton to do throughout the rest of the show, especially then when he finds out that his wife is pregnant, who we kind of meet in the next song or two. I'm going to jump forward slightly to Helpless. I'm not going to focus on it for too long. Number one, it's a hugely important song for me because it was played at my wedding. We had it at the wedding before my wife came down, because it is the song where Eliza and Alex fall in love. We had songs from musicals where the characters fell in love, and we had this one from Hamilton.
Was this the only one from Hamilton that played your wedding?
Yes.
Okay.
We had a rule of one from one show. We couldn't kind of cross over to.
What are the ones? I mean, you I'll slightly derail the thing question. I'm just curious.
I can have a look. I cannot remember from the top of my head. It's been a few years. I still do have the playlist though somewhere. So let me try and find it. So some of the other songs were, we had When I Grow Up from Matilda, had Secret Love from Calamity Jane, which is my wife's favourite musical. We had Love Never Dies from Love Never Dies. Had Love Changes Everything. I can't remember what show that's from. As Long as You're Mine from Wicked, and Falling Slowly from Once.
Oh, nice.
Because it wasn't a massive amount of time, but it was just a little something on in the background before which came on. And I love the fact that it's an Ashanti song, it's a Ja Rule song, it's a Beyonce song, and that it's what changes Hamilton's life, it's what changes his outlook. And then we get back to probably the most theatrical song of the show, which is Satisfied, where you basically see Helpless again through the perspective of Angelica. And as far as a spectacle goes, that's arguably the most spectacular song, visually spectacular song in the show, because they literally reverse their motions on stage and end up back where they were at the start of Helpless. And shout out to Renee Elise Goldsberry. She's absolutely phenomenal, which is something we'll come to when we get to It's Quiet Uptown a bit later on. Lin-Manuel Miranda considers two songs that he wrote for Hamilton to be the best that he's ever written. The first one is Wait For It, which he gives to Burr. And, he's given both of his favourite songs to Burr, but that's just how it works. It's an entire window into who Aaron Burr is. And, it tells us about him being an orphan. It tells him that my mother was a genius. My father commanded respect, but they died and left no instructions, just their legacy to protect. So he spent his entire life working in this privileged, or the idea of being a privileged person. But as an orphan, he was just trying to make his dead parents happy. And, he kind of comes to realize the foolhardiness of this, but, it's just so beautiful. It's such a brilliant song. It's really, really well performed by Leslie Odom Jr. on both the soundtrack and the show. I want to shout out 10 Dual Commandments, which is basically 10 Crack Commandments, by Notorious B.I.G. And the reason for that is because Lin-Manuel Miranda has said that 10 Crack Commandments is a how-to guide for illegal activity in the 1990s. 10 Dual Commandment was the guide on how to do it in the 1790s. I just love the symmetry that he put together for that. And so you talk about whether he used any kind of dramatic license. And he kind of did in 10 Dual Commandments, because Aaron Burr wasn't really involved in that duel. Like that, he was nowhere near it. The second, for the other guy was Evan Edwards. It wasn't Aaron Burr, but for the purposes of our story, you need the mirroring of Burr and Hamilton being seconds in a duel. Guns and Ships, which is the one I referenced earlier, it's the fastest song in Broadway history, which has 6.3 words per second.
That's the one I remember thinking of, because again, the kind of the Midwest, almost triplet style.
Taking this horse by the reins, making red coats red with bloodstains.
Yeah, that kind of faster rap stuff is like my jam. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant, but it was written specifically for Daveed Diggs because he knew what he had he knew what that man could do, so he did it. The Battle of Yorktown, there's an awful lot of history in that song. It's a massive history lesson, but it's done in the typical Hamilton way. But what it does do is it kind of distills what the battle was. Which is, by the way, the last major battle in the Revolutionary War, and the subtitle to it. So it's Yorktown brackets, The World Turned Upside Down. The World Turned Upside Down is actually a British folk song that was sung by the soldiers as they were leaving Yorktown defeated. It's a bit more downbeat than it's played within the show, the actual sort of folk song. but it's where Hamilton and his company did defeat the British, and it was the last major battle.
Oh, okay.
Another kind of dramatic license taken was the fact that John Lawrence was there, but in the show he wasn't, because they kind of basically they didn't have time to explain why he was down in South Carolina, so they just had him doing that within the song. And then I'm going to come to another one that I do want to focus on a little bit, which is Dear Theodosia. It's probably my favourite song in the show. I'm not saying it's the best, I'm not saying it's the most well-written, it's my favourite.
Okay.
And it's a folk song, and it's what, to me, it's what every parent wants to say to their child. It's, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll make a million mistakes doing it, but I'm going to try and make the world safe for you. And that sentiment doesn't change whether you're in the 1790s or the 2020s. And there's this crazy, insane world out there, and I'm going to be there for you. I will do whatever I can to make you smile every day, and I won't be perfect, but I'll do the best me that I can. And it's a love letter to the children. It's Burr and Hamilton are singing to their children at this point. Hamilton to Philip, and Burr to his daughter Theodosia, who the mother was also called Theodosia, but she died within childbirth. So he was a single parent raising her. And it just, for me, is probably the most personal song in the show. The fact it was written by Miranda before he'd had children was very surprising, but the way he puts these sentiments behind it, it's 100% true. If you could say one thing to your children, that's what you would say, which is, I'm doing the best I can. I know I'm not going to make it 100%. I know I'm not going to do it completely right, but I'm doing the best job I can, and I hope that you love me for it. That's why I wanted to focus on that.
I said, and one of the big differences between you and me is that you have children, I don't. So my reaction to this wasn't perhaps the same as I'm assuming that's one of the ways you connected to it is because you're a father yourself.
Possibly.
Yeah. So
possibly. And it's also possibly one of the reasons that we come later on to the unfortunate duel of Philip Hamilton and his passing. That is a very visceral moment, especially in the theatre.
Yeah.
Because the way that the song ends, in that instance, you have this kind of a electronic pulsing, which mimics heartbeat. And they're going back they're talking about when Philip was young, and, he was counting with his mother in French, and then the electronic pulsing, which you can feel in, like, it's vibrations that you can feel, and it just stops. And that's heartbreaking. And then you jump into It's Quiet Uptown, which we'll get to. What Did I Miss kind of brings up, so, I mean, we could kind of wrap up the first act there. Non-Stop is phenomenal. It's kind of a whistle-stop tour through the entire first act, where everyone gets their moment of their own signature songs. The reason I want to bring up What Did I Miss is that it contains my single favourite line reading through the entire show, which is, Thomas Jefferson has just come home. He's asking, what did I miss? And he's doing it in a very sort of Southern jazz kind of way. Like, it's very Outcast. It's very Prince. He's very Little Richard. He's very sort of Morris Day. There's these influences that are all within Thomas Jefferson, or this depiction of Thomas Jefferson. And the whole time he's kind of had this, Thomas Jefferson's coming ho, and kind of like that the way that he's speaking is very singular to him. And as we know, Hamilton has a way of speaking that's very singular to him. And the way that as soon as Hamilton meets Thomas Jefferson, so you have Washington doing it he comes in and says, "Oh, Mr. Jefferson, welcome home," in the same way that Jefferson's been singing. Whereas Hamilton comes in and says, "Mr. Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton," in the exact same way that he sung his name in Hamilton. And what he's showing in that one moment is that these guys are going to be at loggerheads the entire time, because Hamilton's going to march to the beat of his own drum. He's going to sing it in his own way. And Jefferson is going to try and do it in his own way. So these guys are constantly going to be at loggerheads. And all Hamilton has done is say 4 words. And you know immediately that these guys are going to clash. And I just think it's genius. I think it says so much by saying absolutely nothing whatsoever. The fact he's reverted back to his cadence of the song Alexander Hamilton is brilliant. I mean, I can rush through the the rest of the show. I don't particularly want to do every single song, and I'm sure you don't want that either.
No, but I think at this point, we're at the halfway point. I think what I'm finding this is that what I'm kind of having like a lot of the kind of things I didn't pick up on my listen kind of filled out to me and stuff. And I think as we're getting through this, I am thinking like, I am probably going to make time to sit down and watch it during Christmas when I'm off work. I think, yeah.
Hopefully. I hope.
I think at this point you've kind of perhaps not converted me to change my opinion, but yes. But you've basically got me to think, I need to probably watch.
Well, this is all in there. Like, I don't think this is just me overthinking things, which is possible. I think this is all in there. And I would argue that it's all in there deliberate.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain things that are inarguable. Like, we come to a cabinet battle and Washington comes out, he gets a microphone and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, you could be anywhere in the world right now, but you're here with us in New York City." That's Jay-Z. That's Jay-Z and Hove, right? That's it's 100% there. And the fact that, within a cabinet battle, they pick up on the hypocrisies, the fact that Thomas Jefferson is a slave owner, but he's there saying that he wants to fight for freedom. Jefferson wrote probably the most eloquently out of all of the founding fathers, and he was talking about liberty an awful lot, but he didn't live it. Like, he was a plantation owner, he was a slave owner, and, the fact that Hamilton calls him out on this, a civics lesson from a slaver, "Hey neighbour, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labour." Like, it's there. And it's a very modern thing to be levelling at this historical figure. But it's worth applying these, or reapplying these notions throughout the entire show, because what it does is not only to bring it into a current context, but also it's examining what they were doing at that time and whether it's right or wrong. It's like, Hamilton is arguably not the star of this show. There's an argument that Aaron Burr is the main character because he's the narrator. There's an argument that Eliza Schuyler Hamilton is the main character, which, we can come to a little bit later. I love the Macbeth references in Take a Break. And I think that there's a very, very specific one to Beauty and the Beast. That's not one you're expecting. So in Take a Break, it's about how Hamilton is sending letters to Angelica Schuyler. And it begins with the Macbeth quote of "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps this petty pace from day to day." But also in that song, there is the line of "Screw your courage to the sticking place." Now, "Screw your courage to the sticking place" is in the mob song in Beauty and the Beast. And I know that because my wife's got it as a tattoo on her arm, because it's one of her favourite quotes from Macbeth, and it incorporates Macbeth, Beauty and the Beast, and Hamilton, because the sentiment of it alone is just be brave, do whatever you need to do, just be brave. To me, I think that's a call out to Howard Ashman and Beauty and the Beast. I don't know that, but knowing where Miranda has gone, the fact that he's working on Little Mermaid, for example, I'd put a decent bet on.
Well, okay. So I'm just fascinated you've got a triple whammy of it. Your wife's got a triple whammy tattoo.
That's why she did it. It took ages and ages and ages for her to pick what she wanted as her first tattoo. And that was it. She's got it in cursive. So it's very pleased with it. Where should we go next? Should we go to the fact that they changed the lyrics for the UK version? It's one of the only things that changes within the show is that in Take a Break, they reference John Adams, and they say that John Adams takes breaks. And he said, well, John Adams doesn't have a real job anyway, but we don't know who John Adams is as British people. So to us, they say that vice president isn't a real job anyway. And that's just one of those tiny little changes where they've made it make sense to an audience. And by the way, he became the second president of the United States, kind of picking up that poison chalice after Washington stepped away. The room where it happened.
See, now, I'll ask you this because
Yes.
I remember listening to this the first time, but then because the room where it happens, that phrase gets carried on a couple of times in other songs later on.
Mm-hmm.
That's referencing the Oval Office, isn't it? Is it the?
Yeah, well, kind of, yes.
Yeah, and I think like the idea, and is it the idea that Aaron Burr's goal was to be president at some point?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the room where it happens is the "I Want" song, right?
Yeah.
In any musical, you get an "I Want" song, and I talked about the Little Mermaid, like she wants to be part of your world. That's the "I Want" song, and it's taken us this long to get to the "I Want" song of our main antagonist, because he's kept himself so reserved and he's talked less and he's smiled more and he's blended in and he's done it. But then we get to the "I Want," which is basically the gist of the story is that they want to figure out where the nation's capital is going to be. And we don't know how these political games get played, to the extent that Barack Obama actually made a joke when they performed at the White House, saying that this is most definitely the room where it happens, because that's what it is. It's where all the political conversations go ahead. But it is the way it transitions so seamlessly from, the Jefferson style, the sort of jazz style that I mentioned earlier, up into the sort of Burr with his Dixieland jazz kind of style, and the way he's saying, I want to be in the room where it happens. Thus far, I've never been able to break that room, but that's where I want to be, and I'm going to do it by any means necessary. And from this point onwards, he's a very different character. Like, the next track after the room where it happens is where Burr has switched parties. It's where he's defeated Hamilton's father-in-law to get him out of his seat in New York because he wants to, it's political ambition. Like, Aaron Burr was one of the first people to openly campaign, to go door to door and give leaflets and actively campaign for something in the election of 1800. And the reason for that is because he had this ambition in him. He wanted to kind of justify the legacy that his parents left him.
Okay. So basically just where it's solidifying the bad guy.
Kind of, but it's shades of grey, I think, in Hamilton. That's the beautiful, like, it's understandable. He's been cut out the entire time. Like, he's having this conversation with Hamilton. Hamilton's not a likeable character, which is, I think, kind of the key part. Like, he cheats on his wife. He's very, very selfish. He uses anyone he can for political gain. And certain people call it out. Like, Jefferson literally says he smells like new money and dresses like fake royalty. And that's kind of who he was. He wasn't a clean-cut, all-American hero. He was a problematic person, and that's what I think the key to the show is, and the key to the album is that all of the characters that are created are shades of grey. The only one with any kind of redeeming features is Eliza, which is kind of where we'll come to at the end of the show. I mean, when we have the forming of the alliance between Jefferson, Burr, and James Madison, which is Washington on your side, that was so inspired by Kendrick Lamar. Like, we've got, when he sort of says, I'm in the cabinet, I'm complicit of watching them grabbing at power, kissing it. Washington's, I'm not going to do it. But the point is, that came from Kendrick Lamar. The fact that you kind of had these polysyllabic rhymes, which is what Kendrick Lamar is so good at. So we're bringing it right up to date with our hip hop references. Like, you think where we started, which was at Run DMC, we're now at Kendrick Lamar. We were at Drake at certain points. And what they do is they follow the money, which is a key line from All the President's Men. How do you uncover political corruption?
My knowledge of Kendrick Lamar is, I'm going to absolutely, utterly embarrass myself for this. For a good 2 years, I thought he was Lamar from Fame Academy.
That is such a British dated reference.
Yeah.
We should tell him he's not.
Yeah, I know now. But
I'll just clarifying for the listeners.
For some reason I just thought it. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, Lamar. I'm like, oh no, I didn't know his first name was Kendrick. So that's my very embarrassing thing. There is like my very embarrassing admission of the week.
Brilliant.
But yeah,
that should be a regular feature.
Embarrassing admission of the week. But yeah, no, say my kind of I don't really know anything of Kendrick Lamar. I've never listened to any of the albums. I couldn't.
I highly recommend. I specifically recommend the music inspired by Black Panther.
Okay.
That's a brilliant album. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my interest in hip hop kind of came through Hamilton as well. Like it was a real turning point in that I'd always been intrigued in hip hop, and I'd always kind of had a knowledge of certain people, and like I knew Run DMC, I knew Jay-Z, I knew kind of Drake up to, you know, I knew kind of the bigger people. But then the more I jumped into it, and you know, I heard Notorious B.I.G.'s 10 Crack Commandments, I was like, oh, that comes from this sort of thing. So,
oh yeah, I'm different. I've not, my kind of dipping into hip hop and rap music is like almost like a decade and a half. Apart from like the odd one that's crept through, modern hip hop is blind to me, more or less. Yeah,
I recommend J. Cole in that case. J. Cole's fantastic. But where should we go next? Should we go to One Last Time? Because that's one of my favourite ones to stick on in the car. One Last Time is where George Washington is saying goodbye to the nation. He's had the foresight to say that the nation will outlive me if I step away. But if I die as its leader, that's when it will fail. It's what happened with like Napoleon Bonaparte, for example. Mm-hmm. He was the figurehead of France, and then when he died, it kind of all fell apart after him. Whereas Washington had the foresight to step away, have another president, and even though it's kind of a poison chalice and no one's going to be as good as the first one, in fact, like you look when Alex Ferguson left Manchester United.
Yeah.
No matter who was next, it was not going to work.
Yeah.
Even, like David Moyes was probably the right choice, but it's always the rough one. So, you know, John Adams kind of picked up took one for the team. But yeah, the fact that Miranda uses an awful lot of Washington's final address, which Hamilton did write a lot of, and uses actual phrases from that and uses it in the show is just brilliant. And the way that they sort of incorporate it into a 90s R&B and soul song, it's brilliant. And they bring back the phrase that Hamilton has used, that Washington has used a lot, which is history has its eyes on you. So remember, conduct yourself accordingly because history is watching. And history kind of being us as the audience, but also kind of a forewarning for the upcoming sex scandal. And yeah, you know, I think that if we kind of whistle stop through the rest of the show, until we get to It's Quiet Uptown, the gist of it is that Hamilton publicly disgraces himself, by being caught in the affair that he's having. But instead of allowing himself to be blackmailed, he publishes a 95-page pamphlet designed to exonerate himself from corruption, but he admits to a 3-year affair. I don't quite know how anyone gets 95 pages out of that. It's impressive. But hey, because he'd been paying money to Mariah Reynolds' husband, James Reynolds, and the money is what they found. They saw these payments and thought, these are strange. What's going on with this? And that's where they dug that out. But the way that it then transitions into, we go back to Philip Hamilton, Hamilton's son, and he is very much a younger version of Alexander, except he follows through with a threat of a duel, and he ultimately dies. Somebody disrespects his father publicly, and he's then shot. And what you then have is possibly the most emotionally raw song ever written. It's arguable. It's Quiet Uptown, which is a very melodic piano ballad. And up until this point, we've had Burr being our narrator, but Angelica sings it. And the reason Angelica sings it is because she knows both Alexander and Eliza intimately. And the way that they discuss grief, especially that of the loss of a child, is the unimaginable. They reference it in the show as the unimaginable. And it's heart-wrenching. And that they discuss grief being, you're in so deep and it's easier just to swim down. And it's horrible, and it's heartbreaking, and it's possibly the most truthful dialogue in the show, possibly the most truthful lyrics in the show, is that when you're in that headspace, nothing can really pull you out. And the impact that it has on our character, on Alexander, is that he withdraws from public life. He's trying to process the loss of his child, the loss of his marriage. He's kind of all alone. And he calls back to Dear Theodosia, where he says the words, "You knock me out and I fall apart." Well, this is him falling apart. And eventually, sort of throughout the whole host of the song, he reconciles with Eliza, who, had at this point kind of pulled herself out of the narrative, said she didn't want anything more to do with him because of his affairs. He publicly shamed her and publicly humiliated her. But through the loss of their child, it kind of reconciled them. They did have later children. They did call another child Philip, as kind of to honour the one that had passed, which was, I think, a Scottish tradition, but I wouldn't quote me on that. And then we're kind of going towards the end of the show. Like, the election of 1800 happens, which is, frankly, one of the most controversial and fascinating elections that has ever happened in the American political system.
Yeah, I was trying to... So yeah, I think this is the one I'm a kind of... I think I was pulling into Park to work, I think, in the morning when this one came in. This one was playing. So I was sat listening to the end, waiting for the end of this song to finish.
Mm.
And
floods of tears, no doubt, after it's quiet uptown, because that is... I think,
yeah, well, it was the traffic on the M5, I think, that's giving me the tears. But, no, so, my understanding, so this is the one where, like, is it where they ask for Jefferson's endorsement?
Basically, very basically, the election ended in a tie, and then it went back to the delegates as to who was going to be elected president, and Hamilton still had sway over the delegates. This isn't in the show. This is kind of like what actually happened. Hamilton still had a kind of sway over the delegates, and whoever Hamilton came out and backed, then his Hamilton supporters would then also consequently back them. What that meant was that Hamilton kind of had the deciding vote as to who was president. That's kind of overplayed for the show. It's also a massive oversimplification as to what's happened. As a result of the election of 1800, it became a lot harder for one single person to be able to control anything in the American political system. That's why, I don't necessarily want to talk about Trump too much, but that's why Trump found it so difficult getting a lot of things through Congress, is because the system has been designed specifically to not give all of that power to one person because of what happened in 1800. It's a fascinating election. Which sounds like a really counterintuitive thing for anyone to say, but it is. It's just a very strange. Anyway, long story short, Hamilton chose Jefferson, and this became the straw that broke the camel's back. This became what basically unearthed birth for. That was it. So there's then sort of smacking each other in both the press and in letters, in a beautiful waltz 3/4 time song, which paraphrases actual letters in Your Obedient Servant. And they agree to a duel. They go to Weehawken and Dawn, and it's roughly the spot where Philip was shot as well. Before he leaves, Alexander is writing something down, and Eliza wakes up and says, "Where are you going? Well, it's so early, come back to bed." He says, "No, I'm writing this. I've got a meeting, and then I'll be back before you know I'm gone." And the last thing he says to her in the show is that best of lives and best of women, because they're a together loving couple. And those were the words that that Ron Chernow used in the original book, and that Lin-Manuel Miranda used when dedicating both the book and the show to their respective wives, because it's the sentiment at the heart of it all, that he wasn't afraid to die, but Eliza gave him something to live for. That was both within his children and within herself. And, you have the actual duel, which is in the world is wide enough. Like, we go back through the 10 dual commandments. We go back to my shot. Everything that we've come to within this show, it's there. Like Hamilton has this moment of clarity, which is what I referenced earlier.
Is this what they call the 11 o'clock song?
Probably. When he sort of stops and says, "You're planting seeds in a garden that you never get to see. America, you great unfinished symphony you sent for me." You know, he wrote some music at the beginning of the symphony, and whoever lives to tell his story, it's up to them to carry on his legacy. And yeah, what do you make of this as an ending of the show? Like, you kind of know you're heading here, but how did it suit? How did it fit with you?
To be fair, I didn't know how Alex Hamilton died until after listening to this and reading about the Wikipedia article this morning. So, with from what I was gathering from the actual songs, it's like, okay, so you had the death of Hamilton. I mean, I thought he died older than he died.
If only.
Sorry.
I mean, that's the thing that again, another theme of the show is he's running out of time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you write like you're running out of time? You're non-stop, like he's constantly working. He's such a bundle of energy, because he's never satisfied. Like, these are all things, ongoing themes throughout the entire show, is that he is unable to stop. And it's something that Eliza actually says after he dies, is that, the Lord in his kindness, he gave me what you always wanted. He gave me more time.
Yeah, particularly when it's tying back into kind of like this idea of legacy and the ending. I mean, if anything, what I find quite interesting in terms of legacy is that, if anything, what Miranda's done is perhaps either renewed or perhaps enhanced the legacy of Hamilton, not Hamilton, perhaps longer. So, like, because there's always been like, so you'll have people who will probably remember George Washington as being the first person, but then the founding fathers, as much as he said, America's a young country, but as time goes on, you're the people that around that time you're going to start to fade, and you're only going to remember the key factors. I mean, like,
the well-known people are kind of your Washington, your Jefferson, your Benjamin Franklin, who doesn't have a mention in the show, except for Ben Franklin with the Key and the Kite, which is an electricity experiment. He did have a song that was kind of Decemberists-esque, which became, I will come to the Hamel drops, but it came out later on that Lin-Manuel Miranda had written a song in a Decemberist style, sent it to the Decemberists, and they covered it. So they released it. It's available for anyone to listen to as the Ben Franklin song. And it's hard to see where it would fit in the show, but it's a brilliant song. I love the Decemberists, so It's an amazing song.
Yeah, but I think, because I'm trying to think, like, so if we flip it over to the UK, which of the first prime ministers can you?
I think you're talking kings at this point. You're talking the monarchs rather than prime ministers.
Yes.
Because the prime ministers as we know them kind of didn't come around until the 1800s, around about the same time in history.
It's Robert Walpole. Well, Warthorpe, whose first name was Robert. But I think I was just trying to think, particularly with the leading stuff, but when I was a kid, all the eras are done by monarchs, or the kind of houses. So the
Tudors, the Stuarts, the Hanovers,
Tudors. So like the Tudors, especially the amount of time spent on the Tudors, it's the
vastly
Tudors.
Disproportionate.
yeah. So it's the Tudors. So it's Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. That I can remember spending so much time on. Then it's the Victorians, then it's Queen Victoria, because that's the Industrial Revolution. And it's quite funny that I struggle to remember what happens after Victoria to get to Elizabeth II, because
something which you can listen to on the Friend to Friend podcast, where we commemorated the passing of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes,
always shilling.
Nice, that's a nice thing. But but I find it quite but I find it quite interesting, particularly that I can't remember how many monarchs that we've had, but it's only a certain few that we're aware of, or people be taught about.
Yes. 1066 was kind of a huge turning point, right? That was the Battle of Hastings. And we're 1,000 years away from that. We've had monarchs pretty, like, you can plot them since then.
But I can't. I mean, I'm trying to wrap my brains about ones that we talk about. It is the Tudors. The only reason I know King George III is because of pop culture rather than actually learning about him. Mary Queen of Scots, but Mary Queen of Scots was the Tudors.
And also just of Scotland.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting that, like, you've got all these people that will probably have kind of key moments in time who are trying to protect their legacy and to remember it, because there's going to be a certain point. If you think about 100 years in the future, right, there's going to be a lot more presidents. There's going to be a lot more key names, and people that are well known now may not be as relevant now. I mean, I got a sneaky suspicion that people will remember, like, George W. Bush more than they'll know George Clinton. I think Barack Obama is going to be someone who's going to be in the history books.
You can just look back at, like, your Chester A. Arthurs of the world.
I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is.
Precisely, like your Grover Cleveland. Like, there's 44 presidents, and even within that relatively small number, people have forgotten.
Yeah, I do think that perhaps in the future, I'm not really a royalist or a monarchist in the slightest, but I do foresee that in the far future, Elizabeth II is probably going to be studied as strongly as Queen Victoria, because Queen Victoria was the Industrial Revolution, and that was and she saw a massive change in the UK and had an impact on the world. Elizabeth II, like, the amount of history that was crammed in a 70-year reign, I can see school kids getting really peeved off 150 years in the future having to learn better.
I agree. I mean, I mentioned this on the episode I did with Sean on Frame to Frame, but it was basically what she managed to do was, in her own way, she yielded as much power as she could. Like, this was the point where the Commonwealth was kind of breaking up. So Queen Elizabeth was the creation of the Commonwealth, whereas, that kind of all undid itself within Elizabeth's reign. And, she had these sort of very quiet protests, and the way that she went about it, she was all about giving people the best chance. Like, there's a very famous image, and I'm sure it's a very famous part of the Crown, which I haven't watched, but she dances with a black African president in the 1960s. And that image was shocking at the time. But you look at it now, and it was her basically sticking two fingers up to what society expected out of her as a queen. And yeah, I completely agree with you. She saw us going from all gathering around the wireless and her coronation being the first one that was televised to the mass media world in which we live currently. Like, it was such a sea change in the latter half of the 20th century and the first 20 years of the 21st that, yeah, I absolutely agree. She will be remembered and she will be studied in a way that I think that Washington is, in a way that Jefferson is, in a way that Lincoln, yeah. Because Lincoln freed the slaves. He did the Emancipation Proclamation. George Washington was the first US president. He freed us from Great Britain, right? And Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin had a hand in all of this. He was kind of negotiating off with France and a lot of the other powers in Europe. But these names are the ones that crop up the most often, the most prominent. Hamilton wasn't that. Even, like, now I think that's changing with the show. But the fact that Miranda decides to end the show by basically giving it to Eliza, like, she stands center stage and she places herself back in the narrative and she explains all the work that she did to try and cement his legacy. And the musical is ultimately part of that legacy that Eliza created, because, Ron Chernow wrote the book because he was fascinated with Hamilton as a person. He was a historian. So that was his driving force. When Miranda discovered the book and he discovered the man that Hamilton was, he went, oh, I've got this. I can do this. And as, like I said, taught an entire generation about who Alexander Hamilton is and what Eliza did. It becomes a self-eating snake, right? There's an argument at the end of the show, which isn't on the album, it's one of the other few things that's not on the album, Eliza looks at the audience. She's looking directly at the audience, and it's up to interpretation as to what she sees, but there is this kind of a and then the show goes black. The argument is that she could have seen us as an audience watching and taking in the story of her late husband. There is an argument that she's actually coming to terms with her own death. There's an argument that, she's just beginning to survey what she did with her life. So, it's kind of all within the show in honouring the legacies of these people, not just of Alexander Hamilton.
I think as well with ending with Eliza, this is the very small introductory. I mean, the Wikipedia page is massive, but before the content, there's only 3 sentences. So this is what the Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton Wikipedia article opens with. Elizabeth Hamilton, nee Schuyler, August. What? Schuyler. Okay, yeah. Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, she was also called Eliza or Betsy, was an American socialite and philanthropist. Married to American founding father Alexander Hamilton, she was a defender of his works and co-founder and deputy director of Graham Windham, the first private orphanage in New York City. Eliza is recognised as an early American philanthropist for her work with the Orphan Asylum Society. The philanthropist stuff aside, because we're not going to have time to go into that bit. What I find quite interesting is that it says straight away she was a defender of his works. Yeah, even after everything, and she lived till she was 97. 97, but like
she had a good 50 years after him.
Foremost. I did check that because I saw the date, so I'm like, what's the age difference? I was kind of weirded out for a second, thinking, oh god, what's the age difference? But then they're pretty much the same age. And I'm like, and I think that was the moment I realised. I think that's when I found out that Hamilton died kind of early-ish in comparison to.
That's the tragedy, but it's the Greek tragedy, right? That's what it is. And the fact that she's given that time, like the orphanage is mentioned, and she says at the end of the show, that's what she's proudest of. And, I think it's very conscious. Again, I go back to it, it's intelligently written, that the ending is given to Eliza, the fact that she's gone back and interviewed as many soldiers as she could that fought alongside Hamilton. She began to sort of decipher some of the writings that he did. You then have the other characters that they go back and try and unpick his financial system that he put together, but it was impossible because it was a work of genius. And it's Thomas Jefferson, he's the guy who he's fought with and had such disagreements with across the entire rest of the show. He is the one that is admitting that and saying that. I think it's an extremely giving and even-handed ending to the show, even though it is very downbeat. You don't leave with a smile on your face. Everyone dies. That's how history works.
Yeah.
I always get surprised when you watch things like Who Do You Think You Are? And they say, oh yeah, they died at the end. It's like, well, what did you expect? They're not alive now.
Yeah. And I think also we talk about kind of legacy and everything. The Hamilton family Wikipedia article is like passed down for ages. I'm trying to see if there's any kind of living relatives, but I can't see anything at the top of.
My guess would be there would be some kind of lineage. There would be some connection. I mean, they had a fair few children.
Notable there's quite a few notable members in the section, but the one that jumps at Alexander Morgan Hamilton, who died in 1968-67, American philanthropist and civil servant, was the grandson of J.P. Morgan, the financier, and the great-great-grandson of Alexander Hamilton. So I just learned that the J.P. Morgan family is also linked in with Alexander Hamilton.
Well, they were, so the Schuylers were old money. They were sort of Dutch money from New York. So they were very aware of society and of how to portray themselves. And just because Alexander kind of married into that, I think that I'd be very surprised if the lineage wasn't still around somewhere. Whether that's just not allowed on Wikipedia because we're talking about living people who are, frankly, not really any celebrity. They're not really of public interest. So I think it might be that's why it's not on there. But I'd be very surprised if there was no no distant relative alive at all.
Yeah, but again, and it's the kind of but the legacy of Hamilton being like the Hamilton name, like having its own kind of like Wikipedia article and being just like a massive throughout. Kind of, it's kind of like a nice like encapsulates of that kind of whole idea of legacy and everything. But
I mean, it's a key theme. I've referenced the Hamel drops earlier, and I just want to quickly touch on them as well. Again, it was something that there was songs that were cut out of the show that just didn't fit tonally or time or whatever, or there were other covers that were done, and they were released sort of one a month for a year, and then the Hamilton mixtape came, which was again the original title of of what Hamilton became, and what that was kind of a lot of the people that are referenced, like Nas, for example, or The Roots or whatever. They are on that mixtape doing their own versions of, like, they're kind of sampling songs that are in Hamilton. And it's a really, really interesting way to kind of move this whole thing full circle. So you've actually got a mixtape sampling the songs from the show that are in turn sampling previous hip hop songs. It's the way that hip hop works, right? The way that hip hop has always worked is that you have beats from other music and then MC talking over it. And the way that it's kind of paying it all forward, I think, is fascinating. And, you know, the way that Lin-Manuel managed to keep the surprises coming from it. I think that he obviously saw a lot of himself in Alexander Hamilton, the way that he writes, the way that he can't switch off, I guess, the way that he constantly wants to outdo himself and do better. And, you know, let's call a spade a spade. He may never do anything better than Hamilton, because for me, there is something in every single line. And that doesn't mean he's going to stop trying. That doesn't mean that he's going to just say, yep, that's my legacy and I'm done. Even though kind of the message of the show is that. The show tells us that you do your best when you're here. You tell the story that you have, and then you have to find a way to let it go. And you have to find a way to let it rest, because Hamilton never did.
Okay, so yeah, I've didn't really delve into the Hamilton mixtape, if I'm completely honest. But
that will come, I think, after you've listened to the show a bit, when you recognise the songs and the tunes. But it's interesting. There's some really, really good songs on there as well.
Okay, but so that was Hamilton, and we've clocked in at still not the longest episode.
No, I didn't want to outdo the longest episode, but I did think we'd run it close. And it's not just been me performing the entire musical, which is what it could have been.
I feel like there's also a kind of catharsis where you've just been like building up and wanting to unleash all this information.
It's the podcast I was born to do.
Yes. Very, very briefly, in terms of its performance, it did well.
Just the 11 Tonys.
Yeah, the 11 Tonys. But on the play, that's the actual the play, the actual album, physical album that we're talking about. It got to number 1 on the internet albums in the US, top rap albums. Got to number 2 in the UK. Got number 2 in the US Billboard 200. 6 in Australia, 7 in New Zealand, 36 in Hungary. He got to 58 in the UK albums chart. So the general one, he got to 58.
Still no vinyl release. Still haven't got it on vinyl. No. I'm waiting for it.
I wonder if that's going to be an anniversary.
I tweeted Lin-Manuel Miranda about it and got no response, shockingly.
You probably get another one. Oh God, it's another flipping
audio files, what they like.
Yeah, but so it did quite well. So as we're getting up to the closing arrangement stuff, I can't ask you if you've seen the band live, but we've already had the question of that. So you have seen the thing live, seen it 3 times. The same cast, or has the cast been different each time you've seen?
So there's been elements of the same cast. I've seen 2 different Hamiltons. One,
do you know who? Do you remember who?
I can find that out. So in the UK, the first person I saw was Jamal Westman. He was the first person he originated the role in the West End. then the person that I saw afterwards was his understudy from the first time. But then when Westman left, he kind of stepped up and did the main role. That's kind of how understudying works. But, and he won, an Olivier Award for Best Actor as his performance in Hamilton.
Okay.
I saw the same Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson all 3 times, which was Jason Pennycook, and he was brilliant. Like, if there's a character in this show that you would want to play it, either Burr or Lafayette, because just the characterization of him, the way that Jefferson specifically is, like, he just delivers such withering put downs, and he's snivelling and he's sly and he's primped and preened to the maxes and the heights. He's Prince, right? He's Little Richard. That's who he is. And he's flamboyant about it, and he's brilliant. And the man who played Jason Pennycook, he was really, really good. And there's interestingly, the guy who originated the role of Aaron Burr in the UK, Giles Terra, he wrote a book about his experiences of that as well, which can be found.
Ah, okay. So
it's called Burr and Me or something along those lines.
I don't know if I'm going to be in a rush to watch it live. I'm not much of a musical. As it's a once in a blue moon that I will watch it, go and see a musical.
Well, interestingly, there's a blue moon coming next year. Next June, I think it is.
Ah, okay.
So you got to get your tickets now, ready for June.
Now I'm getting a ticket. Matt said it once in a blue moon. It's a blue moon, so he's got to go and see Hamilton. No, I think
that's a fact, Matt.
Yeah. No worries. I can probably watch you while drinking a shandy, Andy. But
you've been waiting for that one.
I know. I've still got a list.
2 hours you've waited to use that one.
I've been crossing them off this list as I've been saying them. But yeah. Ironically, I've never listened to Plan B, Andy. But that
one's that's some fat on it. You might want to take that one off.
Yeah. Shame you can't buy vinyl records at the old shop Tandy, Andy. But,
oh my God, we're getting worse, aren't we?
Yeah, but of course, yeah. Or I'll probably go to the confectionery stand, right? Sit down and start eating the candy, Andy, whilst drinking brandy, Andy.
Wow.
You probably need some brandy, Andy, after suffering through some of these.
I mean, it's a good thing you're doing them now. After most people have turned off.
Yes. This is a massive reference to the Aaron Burr, sir.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I actually made that any explicit when I first brought it up, because the whole recurring motif of the Aaron Burr, sir, and the rhyme stuff for that.
My favourite one of those is the fact that I had a fight with the guy. He handles the financials. You punched the Burr, sir?
I think I remember reading somewhere saying that he pretty much ended up having to write down every single thing he could think of that would rhyme with Bursa, and had to try and fit them in. But So we've come to about 2 hours and 6 minutes of recording, and we're coming to the end of our chat. And
I mean, I can go on if you want. There's bits I missed out of my notes.
It's okay. I do need to get to sleep, but
I've only been up for 20 hours. Come on, bring it on.
But yes, is the $1 million question, which is the song for the Spotify playlist. And for anyone who's not listened to this before, what this is, I'm going to ask Andy to pick one song off the Hamilton album to be More Slides Forever on the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist, which will be following such tracks as Get Better by Alt J and 4-Letter Words by K-Flame. So, Andy, which song from this album are you going to pick to go onto the Spotify Hall playlist?
Well, I know you really don't like long songs.
There's nothing that long on this one, I don't think.
I mean, there are, but Non-Stop is pretty long. Non-Stop's about 7 or 8 minutes. Anyway, I'm going to go for a 3-minute song. It's going to be Dear Theodosia. I said earlier on, it's my favourite song from the show because it says everything I'd want to say to my children through the medium of a revolutionary war. Okay. And whilst we're not building a new country, we don't know where this country's going to be in 20, 30 years' time. And you just have to try and make the best world that you can for the people that are in it right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dear Theodosia will join the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist.
Excellent.
And yeah, that's it. We're at the end. So we're definitely not at the end of our chat, Andy. If people want to find you and listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
So we're on the We Made This network. We do Frame to Frame every week. It comes out every Wednesday. Me and my pod partner, Sean Wilson. We basically take two seemingly unconnected films and slam them together. And there's nothing to worry about. We've got plenty of ideas that keep us going for many, many years to come.
Yeah, and am I still the only person to basically have Sean hate both with a passion?
No, we had one recently when we did Bernard and the Genie and Love Actually. He didn't particularly like either of those. But yeah, and I keep bringing up the theme that you've put up to try and get you back on the podcast, because I think the theme that you've put up is anthropomorphic animals from an existing long-running property with the voice of a man called Ben and a supporting character named Knuckles.
I've forgotten which one was that one.
That was Sonic 2 and Paddington 2.
Yes, yeah.
So if we deconstruct it, anthropomorphic animals from an existing long-running property, voiced by a man called Ben, with a supporting character called Knuckles.
Yeah, I forgot about that because I think I ended up watching. I think it was like last Christmas or something around the time. I think I ended up watching both Paddingtons, and I think we're having the chat, and I'm like, yeah, I've forgotten about that.
You put it up on the Discord, and
yeah.
I made a note of it.
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I genuinely did. I forgot about that. Yeah, I have to come back to talk about that.
Absolutely, more than welcome to.
Yeah, but the films didn't give Sean as much discomfort as mine did it? I need to hold on to something. No,
yeah, I think so. Paddington 2 is pretty safe ground. Yeah. I feel. If you really want to get some kind of needling from it, you're gonna have to do a bit better than Paddington 2. Sonic's on the right wavelength. I don't think he's a big fan, but
Sonic 2 is amazing.
And on that note, but if you want to follow us on social media, we're pretty much anywhere as Frame to Frame Pod. You can follow me personally as well. If you follow me personally, you're going to get a lot more basketball than films. If you follow the pod, you're going to get a lot more films. So that's just it. And you can follow me as at Andy Williams 250.
Yes, do give Frame to Frame a listen. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, we are now finally at the end. We've not reached the length. We're just underneath the length of the actual album. We've not exceeded it yet. Yeah,
that was I wanted to be under the 2 hour 20 mark, and I think we're going to get there.
I think, yeah. I can't remember how long Jeff Wayne's Lord of the World. What the hell am I talking about? I'm leaving that. I'm not cutting that out. I'm leaving that in. Yeah. So I think Jeff Wayne. Jeff Wayne. Yeah. Is he Jeff Wayne or Jeff Lynne?
Jeff Wayne. Jeff Lynne's Yellow.
Yeah. The War of the Worlds by HD.
For anybody listening, it's 10 to 11 as we record.
Yes. I think I'm definitely ready for bed. Basically, that one thing I did with Colin. I think we joked that we actually ended up podcasting longer than the actual length of that one.
No, we're under the length here, and pleased to be so.
Yeah, just about. But yeah, again, and Andy, thank you very much. And I'm going to go and plant trees, Andy.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for having me and indulging me in what is, I hope you can hear clearly, a passion. So thank you very much.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This podcast network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Hello, and this is Frame to Frame, part of the We Made This podcast network, We are a podcast that take two seemingly unconnected films and slam them together with the most obscure theme that we can find. I'm Andy Williams.
And I'm Sean Wilson.
And every Wednesday, you'll be able to find out a little bit more about the different themes and different films that we look into. You can hear moments such as this.
Gwyneth Paltrow has as many Oscars as David Cronenberg. That's just wrong in every sense of the word.
Yeah, but you can't get a candle that smells like David Cronenberg. No, wait, I'm not going to go there.
No, don't do that.
I mean, we've done nearly 10 minutes on why you dislike Zack Snyder, and that was just the first person that I mentioned as a talented name within the
now
film.
you've got to take us in a positive direction, please.
Okay. Jared Butler is the lead of this film.
Oh, that's not a good start. That's really not a good start at all. Keep going. I just want to say, I really love your philosophy about no matter how good or bad a movie is, there's a lot of effort that goes into it. I really like that philosophy because I find myself grappling with that. It's kind of like it's really easy to tear something down because the finished product that comes out in the cinema or on streaming is nominally bad, but it has actually had a fair amount of effort that went into it, regardless of how that's planned.
Be sure to check your podcast app of choice every Wednesday to find new episodes. You'll be able to like, subscribe, and find us on social media at Frame to Frame Pod.